yourself on the screen with your name, country, activity, and to take the time to select the language of preference at the bottom for your interpretation. And we'd also like to just take this moment to publicly just extend our appreciation to the translators for this workshop. It's been one of the better, if not the best, technical translations that I've experienced in doing M&E workshops. And so the translators as a whole have just done a fantastic job. So we're really, really grateful to them and their team. And once again, you'll see on your screens a couple of best practices for online meetings. Today's sessions that we're going to be covering in our final bit here is a session on data quality assessment, so DQA, and context monitoring. And then we'll also have a little bit of Q&A after that to go over these running questions we've had from the workshop, and then discuss next steps before we end our work week. So if you have any questions as the day goes on about what next steps are, how they are, we encourage you to put them in the chat box, because if you have that question, your colleagues have that question, we want to make sure there's clarity as in terms of how we're communicating with you after the workshop and how we can continue to provide you support in these awards. So let us know, communicate, send us a email, a chat, whatever is best. But if you have a question, please let us know. So with that, I'm really excited to hand it over to our colleague Manoj at BHA, who is going to give a brief presentation on data quality assessments. Manoj, over to you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Manoj Khadka. I'm an M&E advisor for BHA based in DC. I have also my colleague Florence Modang to cover part of the presentation today. And she is a program management specialist and M&E point of contact for the South Sudan team based in Juba. This session is designed to provide some conceptual clarity on data quality assessment, which we simply call DQA, and also to offer some practical tools for conducting DQA. We will be also presenting a case study from South Sudan. That's why Florence is here mainly, where we conducted a data quality assessment not a few months ago, but it's almost a year ago. In the second half of the session, we would like to hear some stories and best practices from the field as well in relation to data quality assessment. Next slide, please. So it is expected that by the end of this session, we hope the participant would be able to understand the 5 data quality standards laid out by USAID. In addition to this, it is also anticipated that the participants will be able to identify general steps involved in data quality assessment and able to utilize the methodology and tools in the future DQAs. Next slide, please. So what is DQA? Well, first of all, let me start by saying that data will never be perfect, which you must have experienced, no matter what types of activity we are implementing, and no matter what operating environment we are in. All of us have seen that. Under even favorable circumstances, there are numerous challenges associated with data. Another thing is we always talk about data and data-driven decisions. So for USAID, data quality assessment is a process to help our staff as well as implementing partners understand the strengths and weaknesses of their data, and also also the extent to which the data can be trusted to influence management decisions. In fact, DQA is an approach to strengthen partner capacity, mainly on quality programming. DQA is used to determine data quality for an indicator or for a set of indicators, which means in a DQA exercise, you can choose only one indicator or pick several indicators at a time. One thing I'd like to underscore here that DQA is not an audit or a place, or a way to place blame on a partner or data collector. This is an opportunity for BHA and implementing partners to really understand how the partner's monitoring system looks like, or how the actual monitoring system on the ground look like, where the data is coming from, and how to make improvements. Next slide, please. This slide and few other slides might look a little bit technical heavy, so I'm not gonna getting into the details. It basically outlines the 5 data quality standards that I was talking before, that USAID has laid out, which are validity, integrity, precision, reliability, and timeliness. We sometimes refer to these 5 standards as VIP RT, as you see on the screen, or VIP round trip, just to remember. With the DQA exercise, we will try to answer the overarching question of whether the data can be trusted to make decisions, and also explore information based on other broad 5 questions against each standard. However, several specific sub questions are structured in a checklist format, and you might have already seen the checklist, but we will also see this in a minute. I would like to note that the DQA process is closely linked with the actual data, as well as with data collection instruments, the methods, the system, and the actual data. Just to give you an example, if we select number of healthcare staff trained as an indicator to assess, we look at actual data, how many people got trained. Let's say 500 staff have been trained. So first we look at the performance indicator reference sheet, peers, and M&E plan, and see how the indicators is defined, especially who will be counted as healthcare staff, because we said healthcare staff, and what does training means. We also try to understand the level of disaggregation, how many male and female staffs are trained, and examine what and how data are collected, what data collection instrument were used, who collected the data, or how data are stored and analyzed, so on and so forth. We also look at things like whether term of reference, TOR, for the training was developed to structure the training or organize the training. If a sign-in sheet is maintained, if a training report or photos or other relevant documents are available to review. So it means there are many questions that we can ask ourselves, and we can ask with the actual data. And these questions are, you heard the example of these questions, and see the number of questions associated with even a simple indicator. We feel like the indicator was straightforward, but the questions we ask in DQA is much larger to understand the real quality. After review of data and documents, data quality assessment actually identifies any limitation in data quality and establishes a plan for addressing those challenges as necessary. Now that we know the basics of DQA, let's dive a little deeper into each of these standard. That is the underpinning of the whole process, but we'll try to cover this part quickly. Next slide, please. So the first one is validity, which means the data should be clearly and accurately represent the intended results. So the validity is how well an instrument, here instrument meaning indicator for us, how well an instrument or indicator has measured what it was intended to measure. Let me give you an example from Ethiopia. A few years back, one of our partners reported that 94% of the hand washing facilities were functional and in use. Functional and in use. Just reiterate that part. But the initial reported value, 94%, came down to 62% after this indicator was reviewed as part of DQA exercise. Do you know how there was a big drop? So what happened was the partner did not pay attention to the peers, where one of the criteria for functional, because remember I said functional before, that criteria for functional required to have both soap and water present during observation. So this was clearly outlined in peers. So when we look at the survey question, it was found that functionality related elements was missing in the question. So the partner had to do, redo the whole survey, and they came up with a revised result, updated result at 62%. Let's go to next, please. Integrity. The second one, second standards. Let's say it's within these 5 standards. Integrity is the second standard, and integrity is data collected. It tells data collected should have minimum safeguards to minimize the risk of transcription error or data manipulation. There are broadly 2 types of error: unintentional and intentional error. So unintentional error include transcription errors, incorrect formulas in spreadsheet, or too many people may be feeding information into this spreadsheet, or sometimes not even doing cross checks or data with data verification with original sources. Whereas intentional error include data manipulation, someone purposefully revising the information. Also, data that is not password protected may be manipulated or even deleted by accident. Let me give you another example. In Zimbabwe, a partner conducted a survey a few years ago, and we wanted to look at how long it took to complete that data collection using mobile based tool. Ideally, it would take 30 to 35 minutes, but many responses showed that it took nearly 12 hours as well. Can you imagine? A survey takes 12 hours. Do you know how that happened? So it happened mainly because some of the data collectors submitted the data only in the evening. So they opened the survey on the survey site, completed the interview in around half an hour time, but did not hit the submit button, and they went back to their hotel where everyone was staying, checked data checked by their supervisor, and submitted after that in the evening. We also found that some of the responses were revised or altered. This was an obvious and intentional error, and of course not acceptable as well. Next, please. Third standard is precision. Data should have a sufficient level of details to permit management decision making. And there are 2 parts to this. In a simple term, you want the definition to be precise in its wording or in its language. For example, if we take the indicator number of individuals utilizing improved sanitation services, we should know that, what that means, especially what does the sanitation services include in this example. Does it also include things like, hand washing stations or bathing facilities, washing slabs, or only include excreta disposal system? So the sanitation services is not a precise term itself unless it is well defined in the peers. This might be more technical term, but you also want the level of precision or detail reflected in the data should be smaller than the original than the margin of error. One way to look at it is data can lose precision if the monitoring sample size is too small sometimes. So if an award is providing services to 100,000 people, let's say, but the quantitative survey or household survey only covers 25 beneficiaries, then the data is not precise enough to really mean anything. Next slide, please. Reliability. Data should reflect stable and consistent data collection processes and analysis method over time. So data collection depends on consistent use of same data collection methods or tools, and also data collection analysis method and data sources should be consistent each time that we collect data. Also, partners with high turnover may often lack consistent data, and this is why we encourage implementing partners to record their processes and follow the outlined processes or protocols. Next slide, please. I am moving a little bit faster here to catch up time as well. The fifth or the last one is timeliness. We often talk about data-driven decision making, but in order to translate data into a program, the performance data should be available at a useful frequency and be timely enough to influence decision making. We want the data collected in a regular and timely manner, so both partners and USAID can use the data for decision making purposes. At the same time, USAID and partners have to deal with with the realities, and we can always find a workaround for what is going on with the activity and timelines. For example, the award start might not be coincide with the fiscal or calendar year, or consider other factors such as crop seasons, disaster seasons, or excess influences or holiday seasons that might affect data collection. So in such situation, data collection may be delayed because of obvious reasons. Let's go to next, please. This, the DQA checklist, meaning this use or using of DQA checklist is useful and important for the obvious reason. I'd say some of them are it allows you to document the actual process of the DQA. It also structures way of assessing quality of an indicator by walking through each one of the 5 criteria. The checklist offers method for highlighting strengths and weaknesses and recommended next step for improvement of data quality. It also allows team to identify where data quality errors and gaps are on a given indicator. Again, it's just a checklist. Let's look at the checklist also briefly. Suzanne, if you mind, just, yeah, okay. maybe it's coming up. That the hyperlink, yeah. Okay, while we're trying to fixing it again, we will be showing the checklist, but the checklist and checklist is just suggested guidelines, and you have flexibility to use it. You can also find the checklist. You can simply Google and just search USAID DQA checklist. It's just public document. You can find it there. You can use all the standards of for assessing data, or simply choose to focus on only a few of the standards, or even if you are doing more of a spot check. Here you go. Yeah, thanks, Dan. Okay.
We've also included the link in the chat, Manoj, for everyone to open.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yeah. So what I was saying was, you can use all the standards that we have seen. Can you please go a little bit up? Yeah, here there are 5 standards, plus each standard has a multiple set of questions. So you can use all the standard for assessing data, or simply choose to focus on only a few of the standards, or even one if you are doing more of a spot check across different indicators. For example, if you have a particular challenges with timelines, you can review how the data collection schedule has been established and operationalized for the selected indicators, or just for one indicator. We also have how-to notes for conducting a data quality assessment for additional guidance. Would you please go back and let's quickly see if the hyperlink work. Otherwise, yeah, this USAID how-to note conducting a DQA is also available publicly, so you can simply Google and find it as well, and we'll also try to show it. Yeah, thank you. So this is more detailed guidance for conducting data quality assessment. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Florence for sharing data quality assessment from the ground, where we conducted DQA recently, or a few months ago. Over to you, Florence.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me loud and clear. My name is Modern Florence. I'm a program management specialist with BHA here in Juba, South Sudan, and at the same time supporting as the monitoring and evaluation point of contact for BHA in South Sudan. I would like to share a DQA exercise that we conducted here in South Sudan. And this was actually a remote data collection assessment that was conducted of 3 implementing partners in South Sudan. And that was last year around March and April. And actually the purpose was to guide and assist the BHA monitoring and evaluation team and BHA implementing partners operating in South Sudan to understand the strength and weakness of the data, but also to understand data collection methods and data analysis. The DQA exercise was also intended to trust and put confidence in the data that implementing partners share with BHA. Just a quick background. Actually, in-person monitoring and data verification has become very, very challenging in South Sudan due to the complex operating context. And it is worsened by the insecurity, particularly for those who follow the South Sudan context closely. You will note that there is a lot of insecurity. Also, flooding is a perennial problem here, and added with the COVID-19 access restrictions, that even makes it worse. for the team from BHA to go physically to the field, and also limiting implementing partners to go to the field level. The DQA exercise was conducted to provide insight into the capacity of partners in terms of monitoring, understanding their practices in data management, as well provide tools to review their own M&E systems during times of limited access like I have described. The DQA exercise was designed as a participatory exercise with the IPs or the implementing partners involved throughout the process. There were a number of things that we considered before we went into actual implementation of DQA. First was to select a few of our partners. I would like to make it clear that this was like a pilot. So we wanted to test DQA here in South Sudan. It was also the first of its kind. And given that most of this was conducted remotely, we only limited it to 3 partners. Together with the partners, they selected indicators. Each partner actually selected 3 performance indicators. And we involve actually partner point of contacts throughout the process, and mainly program advisors. And the most important function to have in those preparations were the monitoring and evaluation specialists in each of those partner organizations. We also used our USAID DQA checklist, and this process was collectively facilitated actually by the M&E advisor in DC, who is Manoj himself there, some of our DC AORs, and then field-based managers like myself and some of my colleagues, and then the partners point of contacts who were participating in the process. We then had to conduct brown bag from the start, and then after the DQA exercise, so that everyone was in the same page, particularly the one that we conducted at the beginning. And then the one towards the end of the DQA was to really make partners understand now the importance of DQA and why we should be doing DQA in our programs. We started by some other preparations. The first one, like I mentioned, is the brown bag, which we conducted. And then you can move to, then the indicators were chosen, but also the indicators were not limited to USAID or PHA indicators, but the partners also had the privilege to select their own indicators. We also had to make clear communications to partners about the schedule, the list of documents that we needed. In the process, there was also key informant interviews that needed to be completed. And then we created a common folder, a Google Doc, to make sure the partners were uploading the documents that were required there. And then PHA also was providing required documents into the same folder. So the whole process was interactive. Please, would you move to the next page, to the next slide? One thing also we did was, after gathering all the documents that the partners provided, then PHA reviewed the documents, which included the PIRs for the applicable indicators within the proposal guideline, and requested for supplemental documents from the partners to provide additional evidence of data quality. PHA then conducted key informant interviews with the key program staff, including the monitoring and evaluation. And these interviews lasted like for 1 and 1.5 hours. And this was generally to address, general process assessment questions and indicator specific questions. In the interview, then the PHA staff took notes that that would be documented and then shared later. BHA communicated to partners to complete the DQA checklist that Manoj has talked about it independently. They have to self-report success and the ability to demonstrate validity, integrity, timeliness, and reliability of the data, plus the data collection methods. We also encourage partners really to be honest and accurate in filling information and share data sources such as distribution lists, beneficiary registry, indicator tracking tables, and performance report. Please move to the next slide. After that, we then conducted a debrief meeting with the implementing partners, you know, and was to highlight, you know, what DQA was all about and why it was important to practice, you know, to consider and appreciate DQA. After that, we shared the summary report, and this is really collected from the checklist that the partners had to fill in information based on the indicators that they suggested. Then we had to organize a lesson learned event with the partners that were involved, but also widen it to other partners who did not participate for the sake of experience sharing by those who were involved, but also for those who are not involved to appreciate and understand the importance of DQA. I would feel important to highlight some of the documents that were required at the time. Where one was the updated M&E plan and the PIRs, semi-annual reports and the ITT, data management system, staff training reports, data collection, and any other relevant M&E documents. Please move to the next slide. As I said, this was really, the exercise was collectively, you know, implemented between us here in the field, BHA field team, the partners, and then the DC team, M&E advisors, and our AORs there. But then from the partner side, they had their responsibility as stated on the presentation, you know, selecting the indicators, filling the checklist, participating in the key informal interviews, and then coming up with a plan of action. From our side as BHA, we conducted the brown bags right from the beginning and at the end. Then we did the analysis of the checklist based on the report that was provided by the partners. Would you move to the next stage? And then people would start wondering, how long did this take? But also, given that I'm running very fast, it will seem like a short process. But for the interest of time, I would not need to dwell so much. But the whole thing took like 1 month, as you know, stipulated on the slide there. First, the communication, then the meetings, you know, the indicator selection, you know, the documents that were required from the partners, the review process, you know, and then the interviews, and then the reporting, the debriefs, and then the reflection or the learning brown bag. That really took like up to 1 month. So that's like the period that South Sudan did this DQA exercise. It could be longer in other contexts, depending on, you know, priorities, but also you know, some other challenges that may come, but approximately one month should be able to do a DQA. Next stage. You know, before we go to the questions and comments, there were also some good learnings and, you know, some challenges that the team, both here in DC and equally the partners, you know, experienced. And one which I already highlighted is the access limitation, the COVID restrictions, the insecurity, and the flooding. But also we notice that partners still rely on traditional M&E practices. Most of the things are still done paper-based, and you cannot rule out the fact that data can be manipulated easily. There is less technology that is being used. One is due to capacity, but also a context like South Sudan. Over the years, funding has been dwindling. Some of the donors, have short funding, and so it kind of prohibits continuity of some of these good M&E initiatives. The other one is it was a remote kind of process, even in terms of our locations. We are here in South Sudan. Manoj and his colleagues are in DC. Also, some of the partners were actually corresponding from other countries. So, juggling within or between the time differences was a challenge. That's one thing to highlight. And one thing positive also, partners actually express their willingness, to appreciate and practice DQA in their programs, but they would require like continuous mentorship or coaching, to be able to do DQA smoothly. So I think that is it from me, from me here, and over to you. Yeah.
Great. I think we have a couple of minutes for a Q&A with Manoj and Florence. If anybody has follow-up questions before we move into an individual reflection exercise.
There was a question on the chat box, and I have just posted answer as well. So, and I just thought to, briefly discuss here as well. The question was, who determines functionality in the hand washing example given? So the response to this is, for standard indicators, you will find the definition of an indicator in the peers. And for custom indicators, implementing partners propose and define indicators. And of course, the community or target group or beneficiaries, they are the core. They are in the center of the center when we define an indicator. So it's a kind of directly, indirectly involvement of all, I would say. Over. Is there any other question? Otherwise, we can also take some questions toward the end, or even after this session as well. There is an opportunity to discuss some of the questions there.
Great.
So Elizabeth, you want the next process to begin?
Sure. So we're now going to ask everyone to do an individual reflection. And Suzanne, are you able to post in the chat? Oh, thank you. Showing on screen and posting in the chat here. Excellent. So we're going to ask everybody to click the link that Suzanne has shared to the Google Doc, which as usual will provide you a page with questions in English, one in French, and one in Portuguese. And we'll ask you to scroll down. There are 3 questions at the top of each of those tables. We're going to ask you individually to pick at least one of those questions, more than one if you have time. Now, note down your organization or activity and jot down your thoughts in answer to the question. So we'll do this for just about 10 minutes or so. We'll play some music while we do it, and then we'll come back in plenary to discuss and answer. I see there are some follow-up questions coming in, so we'll answer those questions at the time as well. Any questions before we jump into reflection? as you're finishing up, we're going to ask for some volunteers to share some of what they were reflecting on. So if we have anyone who's willing to come off mute, and it's fine to share here in plenary in your language of preference, because as you know by now, we have the interpreters. So just let us know which language you'd prefer. Can I ask maybe for a volunteer from our one of our Madagascar teams? I see quite a bit of several contributions in that section. So quiet means I start asking more specifically for people. Would anyone from CRS or ADRA in our French-speaking crowd like to share some of their reflections? How about one of the other groups? What about our Portuguese-speaking colleagues? I also saw quite a bit of activity there.
Hello,
Yes,
can I speak?
please.
Vou falar em português. Na férias, nós no projeto de BH, Pemba ainda não fizemos um AQD, mas esse ano nós estamos a programar fazer um AQD. Depois temos intervenções de construção de abrigos e latrinas para deslocados de guerra, os desmobilizados. Então, o nosso plano é, vamos usar uma lista de todos os deslocados que estão naqueles centros de reassentamento e vamos fazer o cruzamento, a triangulação com aquilo que temos lá no terreno. Vamos fazer uma contagem com as pessoas que temos lá no terreno. E vamos usar também o indicador que é o número de abrigos construídos. Vamos ver aquilo que foi reportado até o momento e vamos fazer uma contagem física se temos aqueles abrigos construídos e com sucesso. E também vamos fazer outro indicador que é a verificação do número de latrinas construídas e completas com sucesso. Vamos fazer a triangulação, fazer a contagem e vamos comparar com aquilo que foi reportado até o momento. Obrigado.
Excellent.
Sarafidi d'Adra Madagascar.
Yes.
Je retourne sur l'équipe qui parle français tout à l'heure. Comme j'ai mentionné ici, nous avons organisé des DQA dans l'un de notre projets de sécurité alimentaire. Et nous avons choisi 3 indicateurs. Un indicateur pour la santé, un pour WASH et un était sur l'agriculture. Nous avons suivi les processus comme on a dit tout à l'heure et vraiment ça a duré 1 mois, même plus, parce qu'on était obligé d'aller sur le terrain et le terrain était vaste. Et oui, les résultats étaient, on a pu ajuster beaucoup de choses, mais le problème était, comme j'ai dit dans la note ici, ça a bouffé beaucoup de temps pour l'équipe de suivi et évaluation qui était obligée d'aller sur le terrain, traiter les informations, alors que l'activité quotidienne devrait se dérouler comme il le faut. Et ça a été notre défi pendant cette activité-là, malgré les résultats étaient bons pour l'amélioration de la qualité de mise en œuvre. Autre chose, c'est les points sur les projets d'urgence, contrairement aux projets de sécurité alimentaire. Donc, on n'a pas beaucoup de ressources prévues pour les projets d'urgence sur l'enquête de qualité de données, mais on va voir comment faire parce que nous n'avons pas encore entamé cette activité-là. Merci beaucoup.
Oui, je vais continuer donc pour la partie de CRS. Nous avons rencontré quelques difficultés concernant la disponibilité des données, puisque le volume d'activité, surtout dans le cadre de la nutrition, était très élevé. Donc, les données n'étaient pas arrivées à temps, n'étaient pas aussi enregistrées à temps. Donc, il fallait attendre quelques temps pour redresser cette situation. Et vu aussi que depuis 3 ans déjà, nous avons eu des projets d'urgence qui étaient à courte durée. Donc, nous n'avons pas pu encore mener des sessions de DQA. Mais nous envisageons donc de sélectionner 2 ou 3 critères que nous allons vérifier trimestriellement. Et nous avons aussi rencontré une manque de temps et de ressources pour procéder au DQA qui n'était pas clairement documenté. Merci.
Great, thank you. Thank you for these. We maybe have time for one more question or reflection before we transition to the next section. Would someone from one of our English-speaking activities like to share as well?
If not, can I say something?
Please, yeah.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for sharing some of the stories from the field, and also practical some practical ways of how you do, in terms of verification of some of the intervention, verification of data, and also you have highlighted resource limitation, requirement versus best practices, what we do. So just to clarify here one point, that excuse me, for emergency activities, there is no requirement as such to conduct data quality assessment the way we are describing today. So partners are not required to follow these standards as such, but these are recommended. These are best practices. So all we are saying is, excuse me, please continue with what you are already doing. Continue what you have planned, but also consider some of the good practices we just discussed about. One of the example from South Sudan, and you can also learn it from your own organization that might have implemented activities in other areas, or other organization in the country, or globally. So there are several practices going on across the globe. Please look at other resources available, and how best we can do is a monitoring and evaluation expert, how we can add value to the programming by ensuring that the data we present represent accurate and reliable information. that is the point I wanted to make. And for data quality assessment, we don't also recommend to take all these 5 standards on all the questions. So depending on your resources, you can take a few of those or just one and do the way you want and tell us later how you are doing. Sharing best practices or examples would be incredibly helpful. One of the common challenges we experience or we learn from our South Sudan DQ exercise was double counting. It's not only a partner specific, but double counting seems a problem across the globe. Given the nature of complex programming that we do, integrated programming, there is no way that we can completely control double counting, but we will make efforts to minimize them. So partners might have, their own practices as well. And I see, yeah, we need to move on to another session as well, but just last comment is, there are ways to minimize double counting. And we also wanted to learn from partners, what are the ways that you are practicing. So let's use our, forum, similar forum like this, or maybe, please share your experience with other partners and with BSA when you experience something new, when you feel like, oh, this is useful, this might be useful to share, and do, again, add value to your programming with quality input from monitoring and evaluation point of view. Florence, I see your hand raised, and let's close from Emily from DQ side.
Sure. I'm sorry, I know we are time back, but I just also want to add that, like my colleague Manoj said, DQA is actually a value addition to your M&E practices, but also you always want to be sure that what data you have is actually useful. And by useful means it's an accurate data that you're keeping. From our experience in South Sudan, actually DQA does not need a separate funding, because it relies on existing data. You're not going to dispatch your team to the field to collect fresh data, but you're just verifying the data that you've already collected for each of the indicators that you would like to verify. So that's the information I would like to make very clear, that there is no additional resources that is required. As you implement programs, you're always collecting data. And that is what DQA actually needs. The existing data is what you put in use. Thank you.
Great, thank you both. I think now we are going to transition to Blake talking about context monitoring. So Blake, I'll hand over to you.
Certainly, happy to be here. Can everyone hear me fine? Excellent, glad to hear it. So I am Blake Stabler. I am a food security and markets advisor at BHA. And I want to thank Manoj and Florence for talking about how to make data useful. Because I think this is where context monitoring or operational context monitoring, or some people may call it situational monitoring or situation assessment. Some people will just talk about the markets. How these things relate is trying to get us from little data to big data. So first, you've all been sitting at your desk for a while, so I'm going to get up for a second, and I encourage everyone to do the same, move around a bit. You've been sitting, it's brutal working behind a computer many hours a day, as you all do. So if we could go to the next slide, and we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about where can I get some additional context information. We're going to think about ways to gather information and really how to so trying to take these little pieces of data to the big picture so that we can talk about the humanitarian situation, the market situation, the operational context, whatever you want to call it, in a broad way. So I had a poll because I'm not sure how much context monitoring people have done in the past. Could we put our poll up? Here we go. So I will read from the poll, but feel free to go ahead and answer. So which of these is contextual information on the malnutrition situation in Cabo Delgado, Mozambique? No, this is not actual data. This is data I made up a couple days ago, though it is made to look realistic. But if you're actually working on nutrition in Cabo Delgado, it may not be super accurate. So our first choice is the Provincial Health Authority publishes that there were 300 admissions for SAM treatment and 1,200 admissions for MAM treatment last week. Our second option is that at the nutrition sector meeting that the country director attended, ACF reported in their SMART survey that the incidence of SAM, severe acute malnutrition, was 2.2%, with a confidence interval of 1.8 to 4.1%. Our third datum is my cousin caught malaria very badly and was at the clinic to get some medicine. And she saw a mother and child leave while the nurse was apologizing that the clinic was out of therapeutic food. And our fourth datum is we have DHS data from 2011. No, this is real datum. I did look this one up. Indicates that only 43% of infants are exclusively breastfed for the first 6 months of life. So which of these contribute to understanding our context? And are we getting some answers in? Twelve answers. I see a lot more people online than 12 or 15. I'm not going to think about the sample size from the participants here. Okay, let's go ahead and can we see the results? So I've got good news and bad news about the results. These are all actually legitimate sources of contextual information, including your call with your cousin about malaria. So let's talk about this a bit more and how would you actually contextualize this type of information and be able to use it in your program? So the first source of data we talked about comes from the provincial health authorities. And I think this type of data is really common, and you have this in your program. It's about, you know, how your operations are working, how many people went to X event, how many people showed up at X site. And these are important pieces of information, but they really on their own don't tell us that much, but they do tell us a lot over time. So if I knew what clinics were reporting in every week, and I knew how many children were being admitted, I would know about how the nutrition situation is going, right? How many children are malnourished, or are there more children malnourished, or are there fewer children malnourished? That would tell me something that may be useful for my program. Maybe I could even think about targeting specific interventions to these clinics based on that. Our second piece of information is sort of typical collected humanitarian information. In nutrition with the SMART survey, we actually have a lot of, there's already a built-in data quality check. There's a lot of good information there. And I bet my nutrition colleagues would like to see that whole report, not just how many children have SAM, do we think? So that would be a way to take that data and really use it. Now, what about this phone call I had with my cousin? You know, these things happen. People hear information and they share it with us. Sometimes they even call our complaint lines to let us know. And it's sort of hard to say, well, does this mean the clinic is out of supplies? Was that specific child actually malnourished? Maybe they didn't need the treatment and this was just the nurse being nice and being like, no, we're out, you can go home, your kid is fine. Or maybe they're out of supplies and this represents a supply chain problem that we may need to work on if providing treatment supplies was part of our project. And so we need to do a lot more searching for information, a lot more follow-up for information like that than, say, information from the Provincial Health Authority, but it's still information. We can still use it. And then the DHS results are classically very old, but I don't think that means that this isn't useful information. Granted, something from 2011, does anyone who had an infant who was under 6 months of age in 2011 still have an infant in 2022? I'm not sure. I hope not. That sounds like a whole lot of children to me. But how much has this changed? We'd have to think about what other sources of data tell us about breastfeeding practice. We'd have to do a lot to take this and use it, but I don't think that means that we don't want to know what this older data that's particularly useful was. Okay, so moving on, I have a picture up on the screen. And what do we think is the context for this particular group of people affected by a humanitarian situation?
It's a marketplace.
Yeah, this is a marketplace. Exactly, Emmanuel. Thank you. So this is a marketplace. It looks to be, often I get reports from marketplaces that are gender blind. And they're like, there were vendors at the marketplace. These vendors all appear to be women. There is one guy standing in the back, but it looks like most of the people who sell the grain in this particular marketplace are women. I believe there's sorghum and millet here. There might be some maize flour, but I'd want to find out more about that, probably. How do women in this marketplace measure the grain? It looks like they have these big buckets and you buy a bucket of grain. I'd probably want to know how many kilograms are in a bucket. That may actually vary a bit between the different grains. And so this may not be a precise measure that people use in the market. So from going from this data quality conversation we've just had, there'd be a lot of potential barriers to collecting really good quantitative data at this market. But do you think these women know a lot about what's going on in this particular place? I think they actually do. I think this is a great place to collect some contextual data if we wanted more data. I bet most people buy grain at some point. It seems like something people have to do unless they grow it themselves. And so we'd have to think about the agricultural situation in this area. We'd also want to think about, well, for the people who do buy grain, where does their money come from? How do they get the money to buy the grain and come here to buy from these women who sell it? What else do they buy? All I see here is grain. Where do people buy their other food? Where do people buy hygiene supplies? Yeah. Do people in this area pay for water? For drinking? Do people in this area pay for water for their livestock? This is all sorts of context to build a better picture of how things work. Next slide, please. So when I say we want to collect information on context, what often happens is someone sends me a giant spreadsheet that looks something like what's on the screen. And this is not to pick on the IRC or their ROC program. It's actually a really interesting program. And there will be like 50 different products that they've collected the prices in weekly in a market for the past year. And I'll say that's great, but what does this tell me about how well people are living, how much they're eating, whether their children are getting fed properly, whether they're accessing health services and water? This doesn't, price is a very, very important aspect of information. But as soon as we say we're going to collect some information on markets, this is what our partners and also what the government will typically send to you. And I don't know about you, but I've been looking at price data for a long time. If I have a list of 50 prices, do you think I'm going to understand everything that's on that price list? And my answer is no. I don't have the capacity, and I'm an actual economist, but I don't have the capacity to process this much information personally. And so we will also pick on the ministries of agriculture because they will be like, well, this is the price of maize or maize meal, or in Madagascar, I imagine it's rice that they'll talk about. And you're like, but there are so many other things that people buy. And I would say, but yes, but I only have time to really think about a couple of those things. And so I would encourage people to not collect too much price data if you do need to collect it. And in all these countries, are there national systems to collect some price data we're working in? I imagine in our Francophone countries, it's called CIMA. And I cannot pronounce the French for what that stands for, but it's the National Market Information System. I also don't know what it is in Portuguese, but I know in both Malawi and in Zimbabwe, there's a vulnerability assessment committee and very active ministries of agriculture that have more price data than any one person has time to look at. So I think we're going to have to be really strategic in figuring out what do we want to look at in terms of price data. And why is there all this focus on price data? Let's go to our next slide. So we do monitor prices. If you have a food security or food assistance program, we actually have some requirements on monitoring prices, though they're not, they're pretty flexible. But you may be required to actually collect data, especially if you're doing in-kind food, to make sure you're not harming farmers in the area who grow the same crops. But we monitor prices for a lot of different reasons. One of the key ones is to figure out, are we providing enough assistance? So whether we're providing hygiene supplies like soap, or whether we're providing food assistance, such as maize, or whether we're providing something else, is it enough? Is it valuable to the households who are actually getting it? We also want to know if we continue to be appropriate over time. So if we've decided to actually hand out soap, what's going on with soap in the market? Could people actually afford to buy soap on their own? Is the price of soap even the reason people don't wash their hands, or is it something else? And so are we working at the problem we're trying to solve? And prices tell us something about that, just not everything. We also want to be able to take corrective actions if we see that we've been handing out soap and the reason that people don't wash their hands is that there's no water. People know how to get soap. That requires sort of a different strategy. We may have projects that through their design, actually want to get outcomes in the market itself. As in, we want displaced people to go back to the markets they used to work in. Or as we want market vendors to return. Maybe the vendors come from out of town, they travel, especially to rural areas, you know, where there may only be a weekly or even a monthly market. But, you know, we want to make sure people go to those so that the community is better off in the end. And we want to make sure we're having positive effects in the market. And price tells us a little bit about all these things. But the main thing we're looking at is, can people access the things we need? In food assistance and food security, we're going to call this food access, but it applies to anything that people would buy in a market. Can people get hygiene supplies, for example? So moving on to the next slide, I would encourage people actually not to collect price data. It's a lot of work to do properly. Our gold standard is to have someone stand around a market and watch 4 transactions for the same item. Now, if a lot of the markets look like the one we just looked at the picture of, you could stand around a long time to observe 4 transactions. This is sort of the gold standard for market observation. Did I watch 4 different people buy it? With the idea that people are going to negotiate the price to be what it should be, and they're not going to leave the market, you know, not having bought the things that they need. In reality, in some of our rural markets, they're quite thin. That could take a lot of effort. And also, there's probably someone else in your area who already collects this data. If you do need to collect this data, a great resource that is available in English and in French from our colleagues at Catholic Relief Services is Market. It's the Market Monitoring Analysis and Response Kit. And it will tell you all about how to collect price data. What I think is actually more useful in Market is it provides you some tools to use data in your programming coming from markets, and to think about some of the things to collect in markets other than prices. Now, I'm guessing almost everywhere we work, someone else collects good price data on food and hygiene supplies. That's standard. In terms of other items, it's a little less standard. So if you are working, for example, in a shelter program where you need to buy, I don't know, corrugated iron sheets to make roofs out of, then that tends to not be collected as well. So there may be items that aren't, you know, you can't already monitor that are actually very central to what sort of project you're running. But the main thing, the advantage of this tool, or this, I mean, it's not a tool per se, it's a guidance document, is that it really teaches you about how to use this data and how to use some simple observation techniques. I often refer to drive-by market assessments, because when I say market assessment, everyone thinks they need to go out and hire an economist, and they have no one in their organization who knows about markets. And I guarantee you that all of your logisticians within your organizations are actually very familiar with your local markets for the items that are of most concern to your type of programming. And also, I would remind people, they probably send a driver to the market sometimes. I bet your drivers know everything that goes on in the market because they have to go there all the time. And so think about other ways to use information that they get or things they can collect when they're out and about. Like very simple stuff, like, is the market busy? What are we going to do when we get there if there are no items in the market? Are there things missing that are there? Maybe the people who sell corrugated iron sheeting aren't at the market. That would be something we'd want to know. And that's not something you're going to easily collect with a quantitative tool. It's more just about knowing people and having people who are observing what's going on more broadly. Let's go to our next slide, please. So contextual data, as we can see from our first item, is sort of everything, which makes it really hard to figure out what's going to be most useful for the people who work on my specific project. So I just want us to think about some of the data you can very easily get. There's a lot of secondary data coming from the government, coming from the clusters or sectors or working groups, whatever the coordination situation in your country is. There are places like Zimbabwe, I'm sure you can open a newspaper and there's information about the maize market there because that's a very important aspect of the country. All of the other people working where you're working are also collecting data, and that's another secondary data source we can think about. Also, you're collecting, as you've been talking about for 5 days now, you're collecting a lot of data. And so to use it contextually, I think you have to think about who needs data that doesn't usually see it. Like if I'm running a nutrition program, I might want to see food security data, but I also might want to see some health data because these both contribute to me achieving my nutrition outcomes. And similarly, if I'm running a food security program, I may want to see a lot of data about nutrition to see, is my food security programming helping contribute to that objective? But also I may want to see a whole lot of stuff about agriculture just because that's where food comes from. And so thinking about different ways to move data that we already collect within our organizations, I think is very important. Or like this person goes to the cluster meeting, so they know all of this, but when they come back, are they giving that data to other people who need it? The staff on your project are a huge source of contextual information, especially because you're all hiring people who presumably are from or have worked in the areas that they're working in for quite a while. And so they know a whole lot of things about, well, this is how this works, and this is when that result comes out. And so some of this is learning to listen to our own people. A data source I see almost always neglected is you have a complaint and feedback mechanism, or some of you have many, the hotlines, there might be complaint desk at distributions, there might be complaint boxes in areas with poor connectivity. So there's all kinds of information that people actually want to share with you. And so I encourage people to share it, to look at it. And lastly, to contextualize information like we talked about. Yes, you might get a complaint that some clinic is out of something, but you're going to have to probably talk to someone at that clinic to really find out about what's going on. And so key informant interviews can be a really great way to follow up on something. And since we are talking about markets, I would encourage everyone to develop some key informants that they can use sort of regularly, who probably work at the market. And it doesn't have to be the guy who sells the wholesale maize, like that's important, but also he's probably a really busy guy, and it's probably a guy, it's probably not a woman. But the woman who sells tea at that same market probably knows all kinds of things about, well, are there lots of trucks coming in right now or not? Are they coming from this part of the country or that part of the country? Those people know things because they are there all day selling tea, and everyone talks to them. So think about some unusual key informant sources, because often they'll have more time to be able to tell you things and be less annoyed than if you call, the biggest wholesale trader in a big town probably doesn't have time to answer questions you have about how things are going in the market. So one last thing before we go to our activity was on how do we share contractual data beyond just our project and program. And I think the real way to think about this is through your clusters or sectors or working groups, whatever you're calling them directly, often do have, they might even have like a data working group within that. They might, for food security, for example, the national IPC processes, the integrated food security phase classification process, in some countries in this region run through the vulnerability assessment committees, may have, you know, a group of people who get together to talk about what data is available, what are people collecting on their programs that will be useful for bigger picture thinking. And I think that's really the key way we're expecting partners is to work as part of the humanitarian system to share that data. But let's get a bit more specific here. Don't have a lot of time left, but we have a bit. And think about what data are you already collecting that actually tells you a lot about this context? What are some secondary sources of information that I can easily get my hands on? And I think we wanted to do this at a country level because I think that's going to be most useful. So Suzanne has shared a document that has a couple questions. And why don't we take, how long do we need to take, Suzanne? 9 minutes? 8 minutes?
Yeah, we have about 8 minutes. That would be great.
Yeah. So let's get into our groups for 8 minutes, groups by country, and try to think about what are some data sources you're already aware of or that you're already using that maybe other people who work in similar fields aren't using. So I think that was useful to hear about what sorts of data other people have access to, what sort of information that people are looking at, and basically how can I do better at this within my organization? I think this is going to be a rather challenging task. So I think right now, so that we don't get overwhelmed, I'd like to do a little bit of planning with everyone. And I don't need to see it because I'm not your boss. But I would encourage people to actually write down on a sheet of paper. I am someone who learns by writing. If you don't need to write things down, don't. You know you do you. However, I find it very useful to write things down. So if we can go to our next slide. So how am I actually going to go about being better at contextual monitoring and being able to report on the context, on this bigger picture? And I think one way is I need to think about what's some data already within my organization that I need to better connect within the teams. So how can I move one piece of data over here to someone else who needs it, that maybe helps them form a bigger picture? In this exercise we did right now, is there another information source I heard about that I need to find out something more about? Maybe I need to look at the WFP report or at the Ministry of Health report. And lastly, who else is thinking about this big picture that I need to talk to in my organization and make sure that the data is moving in a way that makes it most useful? Thanks so much for everyone for suffering through with me in this online environment. And Suzanne, do we have time for questions right now or no?
Unfortunately, I think our time with the session is up, and we'll be sharing in the chat the document we've been using with question banks where participants can add their questions, and it will be shared with you after the workshop.
And if and Blake, thank you. But if you wanted to hang out until after break as well, there's going to be a few minutes of open question, general Q&A. And so if anyone has burning questions on the context monitoring, which they very well may, we could address some of those during that open Q&A right after the break. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So the rest of our time today is really going to be spent around, we're going to spend a bit of time now on addressing the open questions and answers, or Q&A, that you've been providing for the week. So Killian and I will begin going through a handful of those questions. Again, we'll be committing to addressing any post-workshop that we don't get to. If you have ones you really want to hear verbalized or have BHA address in the session, though, we encourage you to also drop it in the chat so that we make sure we prioritize it and get to it. And then after that, we'll have a few comments on next steps in closing, and we'll be on to start our weekend. So first up, Killian, if I could invite you to unmute yourself, and if your video allows, maybe bring your or if your internet allows, bring your video up. I think we'll start with going to Wednesday, please, Suzanne, the Wednesday questions. So Killian, are you with us?
Yes. Good morning, good afternoon. Hope everyone is having a good time. So let's do it.
Let's do it. So Killian, I think maybe the best approach is to take one question from each session or topic and go through Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So I'm going to let you choose the questions as we go through, and maybe quarterback those to your team that we have on. So I know we have you and Blake for sure. And I'm also happy to just provide input as needed.
I had kind of selected some of the questions by session. Some of the questions we answered them on Wednesday when we did our Q&A. So let's start with the qualitative session that was led by Hilary and Karen yesterday. So the question that we have there is generally in qualitative research, there is a great risk of collecting wrong information, perhaps due to the poor placement of the approach by the interviewee. How do we deal with these cases in analysis without wanting to lose too much information? So, this question goes to the heart of the design of qualitative inquiry. And what we have seen is a situation where the protocol for the qualitative is not well developed. And in most cases, there's no attempt to even pre-test the tools. And the question actually you pre-test the tools, pilot them just to make sure that you are capturing the information that you require. And then, do your analysis tables just to get a sense of what is coming out and whether it meets or it answers the questions that you have for that particular inquiry. And this will be important in avoiding just collecting a lot of garbage that you will not use, and will help you in streamlining the tools and the questions to just make sure that they are focused on collecting the information that you require. The qualitative inquiry planning sheets that were presented by Hilary yesterday are one way of trying to have trying to make sure that you really conceptualize the qualitative inquiry or study or qualitative monitoring that you want to do. Lay out the questions that this inquiry will answer, because the questions inform the different tools that you will need to collect that information. And also think about how you're going to be able to analyze that information. And then once you have it well conceptualized, you pilot it to just make sure that you're getting the information that you require, and then you go ahead and implement it. That way, we will avoid a scenario where you collect a lot of the information that is not really useful for the purposes that you want to put it to. So that was the one question under qualitative session. On outcome indicators, we have two questions there. The first one is there are a lot of indicators and disaggregations required. Does BHA offer any flexibility in terms of reporting? Thank you for that question. So when you look at the performance indicator reference sheets for each of these BHA indicators, you will see that they are structured in a more generic way. And in most cases, they really show the the diversity and complexity of the activities that we support. So the idea is that you have to select and include the appropriate disaggregates for your activity, and make sure that all the relevant and appropriate disaggregates for that particular indicator, given the design of your activity, are included. The second question is, if required indicators are not sufficient for reporting on outcomes, what does BHA recommend? BHA has flexibility on this. We know that the indicators that we have may not completely cover your information needs. So partners are encouraged where they have gaps in terms of the indicators. Partners are expected to develop their own custom indicators to cover that gap and develop the performance indicator reference sheets on those custom indicators. However, always remember that too many indicators also mean a very large workload for the M&E team. You'll spend the entire activity really just collecting data and not doing much on the analysis. So yes, there's flexibility. Partners are encouraged to come up with their own custom indicators, define them, and just as a word of caution, on limiting the number of indicators on an activity, as that is a direct bearing in terms of the workload and the amount of work you need to operationalize that results management framework. The other section where we have a question is on the post-distribution monitoring. So the question goes: PDM can be difficult for short timeline, given the short timeline of emergency programs. What are strategies for conducting PDMs given the typical timeline of emergency activities? This is a great question. So when we talk about PDM, we are not just looking at standalone surveys. And in most cases, that's the impression maybe that is created, that every PDM has to be a standalone survey. PDMs can be integrated into the routine monitoring, and you collect your information as part of routine monitoring. The information can also be collected on a rolling basis. It doesn't have to be a standalone survey. However, the design of it has to be clearly laid out. Examples are where you conduct your interviews at a distribution point with randomly selected beneficiaries of that transfer. So there are a number of ways in which you can integrate your post-distribution monitoring into routine data collection, and that might be more suitable given the short-term nature of emergency activities, where it might be difficult to have a standalone PDM survey. On other, there's a question on some guidance on the development data library. What is really required to submit and when. I'll cover that in the closing remarks. In terms of reporting, what data sets are submitted where, what reports are submitted where. So I know I've got my colleagues from the BHA M&D team. They might want to add to some of these responses I've provided. Please feel free to come off mute and provide further clarifications on the questions that I've handled.
So yeah, and I would open that up to Blake, Taka, Chung, I see you're on. If there's any questions posed in any of these days, any of the Q&A days that you would like to address to the broader room, please just unmute yourself and feel free to contribute. Equally, our IP colleagues, if you have additional questions, even last minute, just drop them in the chat box.
It's hard to come after Killian or answer a question after Killian. Like he just he takes away all the weeds and he does a good job. So it's really hard to say he left out something.
Well, I'm not.
Lloyd, I see.
Oh, go on, please, Killian.
Oh, sorry. I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat. Are there questions that I left out in the list of questions submitted so far?
Well, I think if we went to Friday, there was a couple questions for context monitoring for Blake that I thought were quite good. And so maybe Blake, you want to take a moment here to kind of address these questions. If you didn't already, you might have covered them throughout your session.
Sure, I can do that. I think in terms of tools, the big context monitoring tool when we're talking about the market context is the market tool from, a group from a lot of different agencies, but led by CRS. And they just completed a review. It's in its second edition, which is much easier to use than the first edition, and is available in French. And we did have actually one of the key people who wrote it, Kasum, is from Burkina Faso. And so it's much better oriented to how things actually work. I think people will find it pretty easy to use. There are other tools if you're thinking about more the health context or other things, but we can get back to you on some of those. And in terms of sharing, I would just really encourage people to go through whatever the clusters or sectors are wanting to do in terms of sharing, and or bring that up when you're going to cluster or sector meetings. Like, are we sharing data? Is that a function of this coordination body? Because often it is, though, with all the sort of busy things that have to go on, some people only report, I think we have 5 Ws now, but there's a lot more data that could be shared and that will be useful for people. And again, because no one organization has the time to collect everything on their own. So I think it is a really important function to make sure we're sharing in all those sectoral groups data appropriately, and so that can build into national processes like integrated food security phase classification, or sorry, I've been working on Ethiopia where it's the humanitarian needs overview, but sorry, the HRP process, you know, and that those can help.
Thanks, Blake. That's super helpful. And I did drop the link to the market toolkit in the chat, and we'll make sure we share that in the post-event materials as well. Well, I think without further ado, then, Killian, I would hand it over to you to begin discussing next steps and to introduce Jessica.
Thank you, Lloyd. So yeah, it's been a very good week where we have shared quite a lot, and we were really encouraged, by the participation in the different breakout rooms, and there's been a lot of sharing. We know that in a one-week workshop, we will never be able to cover the breadth and depth of all the guidance documents and materials that we have. I thought, we tried, by all means to cover, the critical ones, but there still remains a lot to read out there and continue to improve your understanding of requirements, as well as our recommendations on best practice. Next slide, please. So I thought it would be important to, give you a sense of what is available where as we conclude. 4 things that are important. The first one is around final and annual report submission. That is done via our, just click. Okay, that is done via our awards results tracker. The second thing that I want to talk about is the submission of BHA approved baseline final evaluation reports and any other research reports that are produced during the award. These are submitted to the USAID Development Experience Clearinghouse. Just a little bit more on that. So the deck is just quite a large repository for USAID funded technical and activity materials. So the requirement is that you submit all the documentation created during the course of the award to the deck. And such documentation includes performance reports, assessments, analysis, studies, articles, baseline, midterm, and final evaluation reports that you generate on the activity. Just also to highlight that this does not only refer to what you directly do as partners, but if you contract a consultant to do an evaluation, that evaluation report also has to be submitted to the deck. The other thing that I also want to highlight is work with your AOR to ensure that the final and cleared materials are agreed upon before you submit. So it's important to liaise with the AOR, make sure that the AOR gives the go-ahead for you to submit those documents to the deck. And we also encourage you to look at your awards and check the language and requirements for what should be submitted to the DEC. So a close working relationship with the OR is required there, just to make sure that there's clarity on what to submit, and also the role of the OR in approving what is to be submitted. The third aspect there is submission of data, machine readable data to the development data library. There is additional information in ADS 579-500 on submission of these data sets. But suffice to say that the DDL is the agency's repository of funded machine readable and non-proprietary format data created or collected by partners. So ADS 579 provides additional details, but any data set created or collected with USAID funding must be submitted to the DDL. This also includes data sets where consultants or contractors are hired to collect. That as well is submitted to DDL. For emergence awards, this includes your baseline, endline, evaluation report, data sets, PDM data sets, any monitoring survey data sets. So it will depend on the sort of data sets that you are generating during the lifetime of the award. The award agreement also provides direction in terms of submission requirements and any exemptions. As BHA, we recommend that you submit non-personally identifiable information. So this is in the data, you make sure that you remove any information that could help anyone identify that particular individual or household that provided the information. Because some of the data submitted to the development data library can be designated for public publication. So in that case, if you have a personally identifiable information, it becomes difficult to make that information public, as we then violate the need to keep that information confidential. I think one of the things that I also want to highlight is that in your informed consent, it's important that you also indicate that the information being collected. Sorry about that. It's important to also note in the consent that the information might be made available on a public website that researchers and others will be able to access, but without personally identifying them. This is important so that there's clarity that this information might be made publicly available, but without directly identifying who provided the information. So you need to just discuss with your M&D advisor in terms of the level at which you can go, ensuring that the data is anonymized and at a level that makes it difficult to identify respondents. Then the fourth component that I wanted to talk about relates to collection and submission of GIS coordinates for all public assets or community project sites. Additional guidance on this is available, ADS 579. SAA. So data for individual households, because that then would identify the household dislocation. But if your activity is developing public assets, it could be a borehole and such similar public assets, the coordinates should be submitted for those public assets that are created using USG resources. Next slide, please. So here I try to provide some guidance in terms of where you get more information, who you can reach out to get more information. So our website partner with us, you can get a lot of BHA resources, guidance documents, and if what you're looking for is not there, you can contact your AOR or the MND advisor to refer it to the right document. In terms of MND specific guidelines and resources, I've provided those links for the application guidelines, the emergency MND technical guidance document, the emergency indicator handbook, the recommended ITT template, as well as if you're still running a legacy Food for Peace activity, there's a link to the legacy Food for Peace indicator handbook. For Southern Africa, Justin, myself, and Nancy, we cover the region, and we are quite fluid in terms of how we cover the region. And so please reach out to us if you've got any questions. One of the things that we would like to do as a post-workshop follow-up is to be able to directly engage you one-on-one to ask any additional questions that you might have, as well as provide that support. So Justin will be doing that for Madagascar and Zimbabwe. And for our colleagues in Mozambique, I'll be providing that one-on-one support. So reach to us and reach out to us, and we'll be able to provide additional guidance and respond to any questions that you might have. If you have got questions on the award results tracker or software issues or questions, that BHA support at USAID.gov email, you can reach out to BHA support on that email, and they will be able to provide support. So that's what I wanted to share with you, including the post follow-up support, to just make sure that we don't just have a workshop and that's it, but we are planning to make sure that we provide additional coaching, mentoring where necessary, and keep on providing you with the support that you need to be able to deliver. And keep on supporting you to be able to deliver your MND functions. With that, thank you so much. It's been a very good experience. We have shared a lot. We have listened to good music played by Lloyd. It's been a great experience. And with that, I would like to ask Jessica Coulibaly, our regional humanitarian advisor based in our Pretoria office for the Southern Africa region, to come and close this session. Without the support of the regional office, we wouldn't have been able to, deliver this. So, Jessica, over to you.
Thank you so much, Killian. Before I start, can everyone hear and see me? Perfect, I got a thumbs up. Well, I would agree with the earlier comment, I think it was from Taka, that it's very difficult to follow Killian. He has a way of summarizing information and very detailed things just in a very fantastic way. So I will do my best, but thank you so much. So it's a really a very good afternoon to everyone, and good morning for those of you in Washington. I know it's been a long week and you've covered a lot of really dense, detailed information. Just listening over the past hour, my mind is already, and especially, with the work that you do, everyone in this room, the virtual room, has been stretched very thin. You're wearing wearing multiple hats. I know you're eager for the weekend. So I won't take much of your time, but I really just wanted to share with you a few closing thoughts from the BHA regional office here in Pretoria before the end of this workshop, really just to circle back as to why we're here and really what the impact of what you've been doing all week really is. I was really grateful when Killian asked me to join you today, because I've been so excited about the release of this new emergency guidance for a long time. It's been something I've been following for quite some time, since both my time in the West Africa office and in the East Africa offices of what was then Food for Peace, because it was such an important gap that we needed to fill. I think if many of you in this room have partnered a long time with BHA and the legacy offices of Food for Peace and OFTA, so, you know, each year we spend billions of dollars on emergency assistance activities, and that these resources far outweigh our development activities, currently called the Resilience Food Security Activities, or RFSAs, if you have them in your countries. But really just until recently, the bulk of our M&E guidance and bandwidth, quite frankly, has been around these RFSAs. And it was just such a critical gap in our emergency portfolio that we needed to fill. And the reason being, you know, our DC team with BHA is constantly being called up to Capitol Hill to respond to inquiries by our country's senior lawmakers who are concerned about global disasters and how the US government is responding. And what we hear is their number one question is, what is BHA doing? What is the US government doing? And how do we know that our interventions are meeting the key objectives of saving lives and reducing suffering? And sometimes that's a hard question to answer, quite frankly. So this new BHA emergency guidance really will help us better respond to those questions. It'll help us garner stronger support for what we do collectively, and hopefully help us advocate for more resources, which of course we're all eager for. So we know that needs far outweigh the resources. It's really only been getting worse over the past several years. I think we found that Southern Africa has generally been the quieter region in Africa, just meaning it's not really home to a lot of the high profile emergency responses like in the Horn with Ethiopia and Somalia, or unfortunately increasingly in the Sahel with complex emergencies. On the one hand, that's a good thing, right? We don't want to see large scale disasters here like in other regions, but the reality is they still do happen. The tropical cyclone season happens every year, you know, and there's uneven disaster response capabilities across the countries that are usually affected. I think we've all had a busy week, both on the BHA side, and I'm sure your organizations as well, working with the governments of Malawi, Mozambique, and Madagascar, really look at disaster needs. And unfortunately, we're still early in the cyclone season. And I'm sure, as you know, we see another potentially strong cyclone coming our way over the coming week that's poised to make landfall. So on top of that, though, we really do have dire drought conditions in southern Angola and southern Madagascar this year, with populations suffering from IPC4 conditions, which is very dire. So the question is, in the face of these global needs and the needs in our region, how can we show that the response activities we're carrying out here are effective at saving lives and really jump-starting these populations on the trajectory to recovery and even to resilience in the face of future shocks? And so I'm very confident that this new BHA guidance that you've been focusing on this week will really help us better tell our story and to get us there. So I would like to diverge for a minute and talk about failure. Yes, failure. This always seems to be a bit of a taboo subject, but the reality is that we all fail from time to time. And however, real learning takes place only when we take the time to step back and learn from our failures. It's very important that we do this. And I'm talking to us as BHA as well. But I see that we're so uncomfortable sometimes with this process, and especially in sharing our failures with others, especially with the donor, right? So I hope this week you've been able to take some time to reflect on the importance of taking time after the end of a response in your roles as in the M&E teams and advisors on learning, to really learn what worked, but more importantly, what hasn't worked, because all programs have failures. If I as a donor go out to the field and I'm just shown success stories by our partners, then I definitely know something is wrong, right? Learning and the data are so critical for adaptive management and decision-making, both for your organizations, but also within BHA as well. And I think even more so in emergency contexts, because we need to constantly improve as lives and livelihoods are at stake. So on that note, I would encourage you to have what we call failure festivals, where you get together as an organization or an M&E team and you just share program failures. You don't talk about successes, you just talk about failures. And you draw lessons learned and perhaps even be so brave as to invite BHA from time to time. So off that note, I really do hope you've come out of this week with a full belief that BHA is committed to building the capacity of you, our implementing partners, so that we collectively are really able to tell our stories and make greater impact. We've all learned to adapt to this virtual environment over the past 2 years, and it's still difficult to hold these types of workshops online, I think both for the facilitators, but also for the participants too. There's just so much going on. So I just wanted to take a moment to recognize that there's been quite a village of people who've worked so hard over the past several months to make this happen. I'd like to personally thank Lloyd and the team from Ideal really for their strong support, coordination, collaboration, just working in the lead up of this workshop, but also the facilitation as well. Since I joined BHA about 10 years ago, the M&E team has just grown so huge, and I see that they've come out in full force this week, and I'm just really enthusiastic about that. It really shows, I think, the importance that we're placing on this new guidance. And last but not least, I would especially like to thank Killian and Justin for their leadership in this workshop. It's been a heavy lift. This has been the first of its kind in the field, which is really exciting. And so learning from this week really will be used in subsequent trainings throughout the continent. So it's been really important for us. And I hope that you have some way to provide feedback or an evaluation. You know, it's good for M&E folks to do evaluations too themselves at the end of this event, so we can learn and that we can make it better. So with that, I thank you again wholeheartedly for your active participation this week. I think in particular, given the response scenario we've all been in due to Tropical Cyclone Anna, I know we've all been really busy and juggling multiple activities, but the dedication that I've heard in your participation all week that I've heard from Killian and Justin, really it's just been magnificent. So the weekend is well deserved. And I officially declare this workshop closed, but I'll hand it back over to you, Killian. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Over to you, Lloyd.
I'm
I have nothing to add on those good words.
I'm very remiss to say anything. I think those are some of the most lovely closing comments I've heard for any workshop. So thank you, Jessica. And I mean, from all of the Ideal team, it's always such a pleasure to have the opportunity to collaborate with IPs across the field. It's something we deeply enjoy. And we always love working with the M&E team at BHA. It's such a positive relationship we have with you all. So we also deeply appreciate it. Jessica teed it up perfectly. We are going to do an evaluation. We're all M&E practitioners, so we encourage stay on. We're going to jam some music for 2 or 3 minutes. It's a short evaluation, and there is going to be a fair amount of follow-up. We're not going to flood inboxes. It's going to be targeted, but you'll see continuing communications from Ideal around these resources and tools in the coming weeks. But please, Suzanne, if you could cue up some music for us. Open that eval, take it now, please. We review it, we use it. It's helpful to us, it's helpful to BHA, it's helpful to future IP practitioners that are going to attend these workshops. So with that, we won't be coming back